This program shows the trains and operations on the north end of Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District in northeastern Indiana between Muncie and Fort Wayne in May of 2006. The formation of Norfolk Southern in 1882 led to the transformation of this once lightly traveled former Lake Erie and Western and Nickel Plate branch line into a high-speed CTC-equipped main line that hosts a wide variety of NS trains between Chicago and Cincinnati. This is the line that truly tied together the Norfolk and Western and Southern railway systems and allowed traffic off the Southern Railway to reach Chicago. This shows the north end of Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District between Muncie and Fort Wayne, a distance of 64 miles. At Muncie, the Newcastle District crosses the Frankfort and Lima districts that once formed a main line between the key classification yard at Bellevue in northern Ohio and St. Louis. East of Muncie, part of the Lima district is now operated by short line operator R.J. Corman, while 3 scheduled trains plus grain trains and occasional extras take the Frankfort district west of Muncie to Alexandria and Decatur. Newcastle district trains actually operate on the Frankfort district for a mile through Muncie. Since all of our videotaping was done between Montpelier and the junction with the NS ex-Wabash Detroit to St. Louis main line at Hugo on the west side of Fort Wayne, we won't get to see these trains. A connecting track in the southeast quadrant of the interlocking at Hugo allows westbounds on the Newcastle District to get onto the former Wabash Main and head east through Fort Wayne. At West Wayne, 2 miles west or geographically north of Hugo, the Newcastle District ends and connects with the east-west former Nickel Plate Main. Through trains can take either track through Fort Wayne. At Fort Wayne, trains off the Newcastle District head west on former Nickel Plate track to Chicago, northeast on the former Wabash Main to Detroit, or east on the former Nickel Plate to Bellevue. At Muncie, trains head south or railroad east to Cincinnati and destinations in the southeast, although trains on the Newcastle District are considered to be east-west trains, with trains heading north towards Fort Wayne running as westbounds. When this line was rebuilt from a sleepy branch line into a main line in the early 1980s, centralized traffic control was added. However, sidings are roughly 20 miles apart. West of Muncie, there are sidings at Royerton, Montpelier, and Kingsland. We caught all Newcastle District trains between Montpelier and Hugo for 36 hours in May of 2006. The night videotaping was done at Bluffton, where a short line now operates the remnants of what was once the Toledo, St. Louis, and Western, or Cloverleaf main line. The Cloverleaf became part of the Nickel Plate at the same time as the Lake Erie and Western. Norfolk Southern uses 3-digit numbers or a combination of 3 letters and numbers for the symbols on their through trains. Intermodal trains and Triple Crown road railers are numbered from 200 to 269. Auto trains are numbered from 270 to 299. Manifest trains are numbered in the 100s and 300s. 100 series manifest trains are generally considered to be long-distance trains, while 300 series trains are shorter distance trains. The 400 series is now used for unit grain and coal trains. Southbounds and westbounds other than unit trains have odd train numbers, while eastbounds and northbounds other than unit trains have even numbers. Most loaded unit trains have even numbers regardless of direction, while most empty unit trains have odd train numbers. A second or extra section of a 100 series train would have an M in front of the last 2 digits of the train number for that train. Second sections of 200, 300, and 400 series trains would have an I, W, or X respectively in front of the last 2 digits of the regularly scheduled train number. Coal trains are numbered from 500 to 800, with a few in the 400s. Grain and most other unit trains are also numbered in the 4, 5, and 600s. Until the breakup of Conrail on June 1st of 1999, Norfolk Southern used only 3-digit numbers for the regular sections of their through trains. Since the addition of the Conrail trains, NS has basically run out of 3-digit numbers and has begun using certain letters of the alphabet in place of the third number of the train symbol, including the symbols for coal and other unit trains. Loaded ballast trains are in the 900s with steel trains in the 600s. Locals on the Newcastle District, which is part of NS's Lake Division, have an L prefix followed by 2 numbers. Points where trains were videotaped are shown in red. Our first train on Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District is westbound but geographically northbound number 230, rolling through Bluffton at 11:19 a.m. on Friday, May 26, 2006. Bluffton is 40 miles west by rail from Muncie and 22 miles from Hugo on the west side of Fort Wayne. This is the first train through Bluffton in over 3 hours. Number 230 came from Jacksonville, Florida, and is headed to the former Wabash Landers Yard on the south side of Chicago. On the point of this good-sized train are a C40-9W, a 4-axle Jeep 38-2, and a C39-8. Number 230 has 6,800 feet of autos, import, export, and domestic containers, and a single trailer belonging to trucker Snyder National from Jacksonville and Atlanta, and from connecting trains at Danville, Kentucky for Chicago. Most, if not all, the autos came from the Toyota plant at Georgetown, Kentucky. The containers include several EMP, NACS, and J.B. Hunt ones. EMP and NACS are domestic container pools to which NS belongs, and Snyder National and J.B. Hunt are the largest and second largest over-the-highway full truckload carriers, respectively. Number 230 is about 5 hours late. The speed limit through Bluffton is 30 miles an hour. Number 230 has an even train number because it is considered to be a northbound rather than a westbound. Number 230 and its one-time southbound counterpart 231 were the first pair of intermodal trains to run on the revitalized Newcastle District in 1983, when they were switched from a roundabout routing between Chicago and Cincinnati via the Southern Railway through Louisville and a connection with the Missouri Pacific at Salem in southern Illinois. Southbound number 231 has since been dropped. An eastbound Triple Crown road railer is next at 12:37 in the afternoon, charging across the flat Indiana landscape 11 miles east or geographically south of Bluffton and a mile east of Keystone at just over 50 miles an hour. For power, 251 has a new BNSF ES44DC with a General Electric 12-cylinder Evolution Series engine followed by venerable SD40-2. There are former Amtrak, Union Pacific, Canadian National, and Swift Transport trailers on this and the other Triple Crown trains that we will see. Number 251 originated at Sandusky, where NS's Bellevue to Sandusky line connects with the former Conrail Chicago line that NS now operates. Headed south to Bellevue and then west to Fort Wayne, where it spent several hours being reblocked and picking up. 251 is bound for the Triple Crown Yard at East Point, south of Atlanta. The length limit for road railers has been gradually raised from 75 at Triple Crown's inception in 1986 to 125 in 1996 and 150 in 2002. With these length increases, NS now runs only one road railer each way between Fort Wayne and Atlanta. This train is about 3 hours late. "23 minutes later, another eastbound intermodal rolls through Montpelier 2 miles further east. For power, 25A has a C40-9W and EMD's answer to the GE ES44DC, a new SD70M-2 that also has direct current traction motors. 25A is a fairly new symbol that runs from Landers Yard in Chicago to Danville, Kentucky, where it connects with other trains for points all over the Southeast. This train is considered to be a southbound, accounting for the odd train number, and is the eastbound counterpart to number 230 seen earlier. Like 230, 25A has a mix of import-export and a larger domestic containers and a handful of trailers, including one belonging to trucker U.S. Express Enterprises. There are over 50 domestic containers on this train, including 3 owned or leased by the Hub Group, the largest intermodal marketer, or IMC. A westbound met the last 2 trains in a nearly 2-mile-long siding that begins a half-mile east of here and accelerates through the center of town 10 minutes later. 196 has a pair of C40-9Ws for power. Number 196 runs from the Hump Classification Yard in Chattanooga to Detroit and is considered to be a northbound, hence its even train number. From Fort Wayne, this train will take former Wabash track to Oakwood Yard in Detroit. Crew availability has been a problem this long holiday weekend, and number 196 is 22 hours late. Besides autos from assembly plants in the south, 196 has a few containers for Canadian Pacific and Detroit, empty paper and auto parts boxes, and a few other manifest cars for Oakwood to sort. After a nearly 4-hour break between trains, a long westbound lumbers past the west end of the siding at Montpelier at 4:58 p.m. A SD60i, still in Conrail paint, is in the lead, followed by another C40-9W. NS has over 1,100 wide-nosed C40-9Ws, often referred to as catfish, and 125 standard cab C40-9s. Number 235 came from Norfolk and is mostly import-export containers from the port of Norfolk, the third largest container port on the East Coast for landers. Number 235 also had a few EMP and Hub Group containers. EMP is a pool of domestic containers owned by NS, Union Pacific, and Canadian Pacific. The two BNSF containers on this train are on long-term lease to the Hub Group. At Fort Wayne, at 235 will head west to Landers via the former Nickel Plate. This train sometimes runs in two sections. Number 235 takes a somewhat roundabout routing via Knoxville, Cincinnati, and Fort Wayne to get to Chicago. This route has the clearances to handle double stacks. NS has begun spending $250 million of private and public funds to increase clearances on their direct line to Norfolk through Columbus and Roanoke in order to handle double stacks on that line. When that project is completed 3 years from now, this train and its eastbound counterpart, number 236, will be routed off the Newcastle District. An hour later, the eastbound local from Fort Wayne to Muncie rolls through Ponetta, 8 miles west of Montpelier. The Union Pacific SD70M and Jeep 40-2 have only 3 grain cars in tow. There are several large elevators along this line, and L69 can take 12 hours getting to Muncie. Next, at 6:50 p.m., a westbound automotive service train rumbles through Bluffton. Number 276 has a catfish in a lead, followed by a SD60. This train is passing a small yard in Bluffton where NS connects with the Wabash Central Railroad short line that operates the former Toledo, St. Louis and Western and nickel plate line that crosses the Newcastle district here in Bluffton. Unfortunately, the track of the Wabash Central, who operates on the NS Main for a short distance before it diverges to the east or quarter miles west of here, is in deplorable condition. Number 276 comes from Atlanta and has loaded auto racks, including 2 articulated ones and empty auto parts cars from the GM and Ford assembly plants near Atlanta for Bellevue in northern Ohio. Bellevue is 125 miles east of Fort Wayne on the former nickel plate. Unfortunately, the 2 assembly plants in Atlanta are both scheduled to close in the next couple of years, so this train will soon be history. Number 276 is about 5 hours late. It was kind of strange to see a fairly new UP SD70M on the previous local. However, foreign and leased power is common on NS today, as railroads are always repaying horsepower hours, and NS is using everything they can get their hands on. And even longer westbound is the next train through Bluffton, where we will spend the night 2 hours later at 8:55 in the evening. Another C40-9W is on the point, followed by a SD60I still in Conrail paint. As mentioned earlier, track speed through Bluffton is 30 miles an hour due to the many grade crossings. Number 216 is the primary intermodal train from Atlanta to Landers, and unlike many of the trains that we will see, it is right on time. This train and its geographically southbound counterpart, number 215, were begun in 1993 primarily to handle the then new J.B. Hunt and Snyder National business between Chicago and the Southeast. Today's 216 has over 70 J.B. Hunt and Snyder National containers and trailers, along with several UPS, U.S. Express Enterprises, and FFE trailers and 30 EMP containers. Schneider just got into domestic containers a little over a year ago. NS has the UPS contract between Chicago and Atlanta. There are also several NACS containers and BNSF or Norfolk Southern domestic containers leased to the Hub Group on this 7,700-foot-long train. NACS is a pool of domestic containers owned by just about every Class 1 railroad in the U.S. and Canada. Several of the EMP containers are leased to Schneider National as part of their Schneider Optimodal program. There are 8 refrigerated or reefer trailers on this train, 6 belonging to Alliance Shippers, a shippers co-op based in California, and 2 to Trucker FFE. This is quite a train. 31 minutes later, an eastbound manifest rolls through town in our first night shot at Bluffton. Number 177 has a C40-8W with the wide nose that rail fans like to call a wide cab that is still in Conrail paint, and a C40-9W that has spent many months in primer paint for power. This manifest came from the former nickel plate Calumet Yard in Chicago and is headed to the Hump Yard in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Half of this train is finished autos from assembly plants in the upper Midwest for auto unloading facilities in the Southeast. 177 also has a few high-cube boxcars of auto parts, steel coils, and some grain and chemicals. This train is 6 hours late, primarily due to a shortage of crews this long holiday weekend. The yards in Fort Wayne where this train worked are also plugged. GM has been stockpiling auto parts cars in anticipation of a strike at Delphi, their largest parts supplier, and many of those cars are being stored at centrally located Fort Wayne, reducing yard capacity. We will hear several trains during the night being held out of Fort Wayne because there is no room in the yard for them to work, or the outbound crew is not on duty yet. The eastbound Fort Wayne to Muncie turn at train number 313 is next at 11 p.m., pulled by a single C40-9W. 313 runs from the main yard in Fort Wayne on the east side of town at New Haven, where the ex-Nickel Plate and Wabash mains cross at grade to Muncie, and then returns to Fort Wayne under the same train number. Most of this train is center beam flats of lumber for a distributor in Muncie and covered hoppers used to transport talc, plastic pellets, and sand. Number 313 is about 3 hours late, delayed getting out of Fort Wayne. Number 313 met a westbound at Montpelier, and 47 minutes later at 11:47 p.m., that westbound drifts through town. A new SD70M-2 is the lead unit, followed by SD60I still in Conrail paint 7 years after the Conrail split, and a SD40-2. This is the next day's number 196 from Chattanooga to Oakwood Yard in Detroit. This train is only about 8 hours late. Today's 196 is similar in length to the previous day's train, although it has fewer loaded multilevels and no intermodal traffic for CP in Detroit, but has many more covered hoppers used to transport grain and chemicals. Many of the boxcars are empty paper cars. The westbound road railer is next at 12:19 in the morning on Saturday, May 27th, 2006. The power is an unusual combination of a NSC 40-9W and a TFM SD70 Mac. Mexican Railroad TFM is now owned by the Kansas City Southern, and its name has been changed to Kansas City Southern of Mexico. Number 264 runs from NS's Road Railer Terminal at East Point, south of Atlanta, to Chicago. This train will spend an hour or more at the Triple Crown Yard in Fort Wayne, swapping blocks with trains from Sandusky, Detroit, and Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, before heading west to Calumet Yard in Chicago. 264 is about 2 hours late. The north end of Norfolk Southern's Newcastle district between Muncie and Fort Wayne was once a branch line of the Lake Erie and Western, whose main line ran in a westerly direction from Sandusky on Lake Erie to Peoria. The L.E.&W. fell under the control of the Van Sweringen brothers of Cleveland in 1922, who also controlled the nickel plate. The nickel plate's main line ran from Buffalo to Chicago through Fort Wayne. In August of 1879, the Lake Erie and Louisville, whose earliest antecedent was chartered in 1853, and the Indianapolis and Sandusky were combined to form the Lake Erie and Western. A few months later, the L.E.&W. added the Lafayette, Bloomington, and Muncie. Together with a connection in Muncie that was opened a year later, this gave the LE&W an east-west main line from Fremont, Ohio to Bloomington, Illinois, and a branch to Indianapolis. The main was later extended to Sandusky and Peoria. In 1890, the LE&W added to Fort Wayne, Cincinnati, and Louisville, also known as the Muncie Road, whose oldest component dated to 1849. The FWC&L ran from Fort Wayne through here to Connersville via Newcastle and crossed the LE&W at Muncie. Next, at 12:43 a.m., a short eastbound 197 from Oakwood Yard in Detroit to Cincinnati rolls through Bluffton behind another C40-9W and a high-nose SD40-2. Like several other eastbounds that we will see, this train has an odd train number because it is considered to be a southbound. Number 197 is mostly autos and auto parts, along with a few containers, empty coal hoppers, and other cars from Detroit and Fort Wayne. This train is the southbound counterpart of the earlier 196 that originated in Chattanooga. In spite of having to work in Fort Wayne, 197 is actually an hour early. Our next train on Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District is a long eastbound intermodal at 2:50 in the morning. Up front are a pair of C40-9Ws, including one that was delivered late in 2004. Number 215 runs from Landers to Jacksonville and is about 45 minutes early. Southbound number 215 is the counterpart to the earlier 216. This 7,800-foot-long train has nearly 100 J.B. Hunt, Snyder National, EMP, NACS, Hub Group, and Swift Transportation domestic containers on it, blocked for Inman and Austell Yard serving Atlanta, the FEC in Jacksonville, and Jacksonville proper. 215 also has 36 truckers' trailers, including 9 belonging to UPS. The Newcastle District tract between here and Fort Wayne was built by the Fort Wayne, Muncie, and Cincinnati, a predecessor of the Fort Wayne, Cincinnati, and Louisville, in 1869. A year later, the line was opened to Muncie in a connection with its parent, the Cincinnati and Indianapolis Junction. After several name changes and bankruptcies, the railroad from Fort Wayne to Connersville became known as the Fort Wayne, Cincinnati, and Louisville until its takeover by the L.E.&W. in 1890 after it had lost its connection to Cincinnati, the White Water Line. With a nickel plate main line to St. Louis and Peoria running through Muncie, the Connersville to Fort Wayne line became a lightly used branch line. In 1959, the Norfolk and Western, having just taken over the Virginian, was looking to reduce its dependence on coal and began talks with the nickel plate about a merger. The nickel plate was quite willing, but the N&W had to first persuade their largest shareholder, the Pennsylvania, to go along, and also acquire a Pennsylvania branch line that ran from the N&W terminus at Columbus, Ohio, to Sandusky on Lake Erie through Bellevue, where it crossed the nickel plate, connecting the two roads. Next is number 313, the Fort Wayne to Muncie turn on its westbound leg, returning to Fort Wayne at 4:27 in the morning with a somewhat larger train and a second unit, a high-nosed Jeep 38-2 that was picked up in Muncie. Most of this train is empty center beam lumber flats and covered hoppers used to transport plastic pellets, cement, and grain, along with a few high-cube auto parts boxes and other boxes that mostly carried Canadian paper in the other direction. The train will pull in a Kingsland siding that begins 7 miles west of here, and the crew will die there or reach its maximum 12 hours that they are allowed to be on duty, as there currently is no room in the yard at Fort Wayne for this train. Merging with the nickel plate would give the N&W a longer haul on their coal for the upper Midwest and reduce their dependence on coal. An hour and 20 minutes later at 5:47 a.m., the next day's westbound number 230 rumbles through Bluffton behind a pair of C40-9Ws. 230 runs from Jacksonville to Landers and is considered to be a northbound, hence its even train number. Today's number 230 is slightly longer than yesterday's train, which was the first train on this program. Its consist is similar, with autos from Georgetown, J.B. Hunt, EMP, NACS, Hub Group, and Swift Transportation domestic containers, many import-export containers, and a handful of trailers. At this point, number 230 is only an hour late, but this train will be held in Kingsland Siding, 7 miles west of here, for nearly 9 hours before it will be recrewed, because there is no crew for this train available in Fort Wayne and no room to hold the train there. The Pennsylvania Railroad owned 39% of the N&W, giving them effective control. However, the Pennsylvania was involved with its own merger negotiations with the New York Central in 1959 and knew that they would likely be required to divest themselves of their N&W stock, giving the N&W an opening. The Pennsy also forced the N&W to take the marginally profitable Wabash, which had been under Pennsy control for many decades. The Wabash, whose main line also ran through Fort Wayne, would give the N&W access to Kansas City, the only eastern road to cross the Mississippi River boundary between eastern and western railroads. After a 2.5-hour break, an unusually short eastbound number 236, led by more UP SD70Ms, rolls through the north side of Bluffton at 8:22 a.m. Number 236 runs from Landers to Norfolk and is all import-export containers for the Port of Norfolk. Next is eastbound 25A from Landers to Danville, seen 3 miles west of Bluffton at 11:50 a.m. For power, this train has a high-nose Jeep 38-2 and another UP SD70M. Perhaps UP is using these units to repay horsepower hours owed to NS. Today's 6,000-foot 25A has a similar sized train as yesterday's 25A, which was seen at Montpelier. Today's train is an hour later than yesterday's and is 3 hours ahead of schedule through here. Besides many import-export containers, 25A has 50 domestic containers and a couple of truckers' trailers for connecting trains at Danville. The merger of the Wabash and Nickel Plate Railroads with the Norfolk and Western was consummated along with the purchase of the ex-Pennsy Columbus to Sandusky line on October 16, 1964. In April of 1979, the N&W and Southern Railway began talks that would eventually lead to a merger. This was a reaction to the planned Chessie System Seaboard Coastline merger that led to the formation of CSX a year later. Norfolk Southern was formed from the merger of the Norfolk and Western and Southern Railways on June 1, 1982. Quite a bit of the Southern Railway traffic in Cincinnati was bound for the Chicago Gateway via connections at Cincinnati, and the new Norfolk Southern quickly made plans to keep that traffic on NS west of Cincinnati. Just over an hour later, the single C40-9W is wide open as the first or advanced section of number 235 attacks a small hill 2 miles further west and 5 miles geographically north of Bluffton at 1:36 in the afternoon. Westbound I-35 is 4 hours earlier than yesterday's 235, but is still nearly 6 hours late. NS employees sometimes call these trains with only one unit wonders. NS uses the prefix I for extra sections of 200 series intermodal trains. The regular section of number 235 will be along just over an hour from now. I-35 has import-export containers from the port of Norfolk, along with nearly 30 domestic containers and a single piggyback flat for Landers Yard in Chicago. Westbound number 313, which was through Bluffton at 4:27 a.m. and has been sitting in Kingsland siding for over 8 hours, has been recrewed and left Kingsland just ahead of this train. Next is eastbound Triple Crown Road Railer number 251, pulled by 2 more GEs, approaching the west end of Kingsland siding, 8 miles west of Bluffton, just over an hour later at 2:40 p.m. Number 251 is slowing, as it will have to wait on the main at the other end of the siding for 2 westbounds to get by. The first westbound at number 251 will meet here. The 230 that we saw go through Bluffton at 5:47 this morning is still sitting in the siding here and has just been recrewed. And the other westbound is just now approaching the other end of the siding. Today's 251 from Sandusky to East Point is just about the same length as yesterday's 251 seen near Keystone at 12:37 p.m. yesterday afternoon. As a condition of the formation of Conrail on April 1st of 1976, part of the former Pennsylvania Railroad, Cincinnati to Chicago, Maine, between Cincinnati and Newcastle, was sold to the N&W. This line, together with upgrading the old nickel plate branch from Muncie to Newcastle, gave the N&W a much shorter route from Cincinnati to Decatur, Illinois, via Frankfort and Lafayette, Indiana. NS Manifest trains 123 and 124 between Chattanooga and Decatur still ply that route today, and Elkhart to Macon train 175 takes the Newcastle district south of Muncie. It runs via the former Conrail Marion branch, getting onto the Frankfort district at Alexandria. After the merger of the Southern Railway and N&W in 1982, NS quickly upgraded the north end of the former nickel plate line from Muncie to Fort Wayne with heavy rail, deep ballast, and centralized traffic control, although the sidings were and still are about 20 miles apart. Numbers 143 and 144 between Chattanooga and Chicago began running through here in 1982, shortly after the merger, and before all the track work was done. Intermodal trains number 230 and 231 between Atlanta and Chicago came to this line a year later. These trains had previously taken a roundabout routing via the Southern Railway's St. Louis line as far as Salem, Illinois, and the Missouri Pacific between Salem and Chicago. By 1990, the north end of the Newcastle district was seeing 7 trains each way and more south or railroad east of Muncie. Double stack trains 235 and 236 from Norfolk to Chicago were added in 1991. Just before the Conrail split, the traffic on the north end of the Newcastle district peaked at around 10 through freights each way. After the Conrail split in 1999, some schedules, including Macon to Chicago trains 175 and 176, were rearranged to originate or terminate at the former Conrail hump yards in Columbus and Elkhart, Indiana, that NS got as part of their share of Conrail. This reduced the train count on the north end of the Newcastle district by about 2 each way, especially after the upgrading of the Sandusky district north of Columbus was complete. Six minutes later, the westbound and the siding, number 230, begins to pull. The outgoing crew will inspect the train as it slowly pulls by. Since we videotaped this train earlier, we will not show all of this train a second time. 230 spent nearly 9 hours here waiting to be recrewed, and as a result is 10 hours late. The other westbound, meeting number 251 here, pulled into the siding as 230 was leaving, and 14 minutes later at 3:10 in the afternoon gets a restricting signal to leave. This regular section of number 235 from Norfolk to Landers is about 8 hours late and has a standard cab C40-8 and a UP SD70M for power. This second irregular section of number 235 has import-export containers from the port of Norfolk and a few autos that probably came from the Ford truck assembly plant in Norfolk, all for Landers. After Norfolk Southern made their first unsuccessful bid to buy Conrail in 1987, Conrail was privatized. Then CSX dropped a bombshell on October 15, 1996, when they announced that Conrail had agreed to be acquired by CSX. After a drawn-out proxy fight, NS and CSX finally agreed to split Conrail nearly equally between them. This agreement to break up Conrail was approved by the Surface Transportation Board on June 8, 1998, and both railroads began operating their shares of Conrail on June 1, 1999. Initially, the Conrail split led to a slight increase in traffic through here, as a few trains were rerouted off the very congested Sandusky district between Columbus and Bellevue. But as second track was added to the Sandusky district, these trains were moved back to a routing via Columbus. Not counting trains seen twice or locals, we have seen 8 westbounds, including the 2 sections of number 235, and 7 eastbounds that should have run through here over a 24-hour period. The timekeeping of these trains is usually pretty good, but the shortage of crews over this holiday weekend and congestion in the yard in Fort Wayne has caused many trains to run late, and several trains have had to wait many hours for a new crew at Fort Wayne. Several grain trains a week in each direction, including ones originating on the Wabash Central at Bluffton, also traverse this line, with the loads usually headed to poultry feeders in the south, and molten sulfur trains 60N and 61N between Chicago and Occidental, Florida, also run about once a week. And on occasion, trains will still be rerouted off the Sandusky and Columbus districts between Bellevue and Cincinnati to this line. Our last through train on the Newcastle District is eastbound 197 from Detroit to Cincinnati, charging through Ossian, 3 miles west of Kingsland at 4:41 p.m. A CSX SD60I, which is a former Conrail unit, is on the point. This is the second 197 that we have seen. Unless its schedule has changed, this train is nearly 9 hours early. Today's 197 is over twice as big as the previous day's train that was through Bluffton at 12:43 this morning. Over half of this train is autos and empty auto parts cars. The intermodal traffic on this 8,100-foot train is from the Canadian Pacific and Detroit, and most of the containers are owned by CP ships. Although the north end of Norfolk Southern's Newcastle district is not quite as busy as it was before the Conrail split, it is a fascinating line with a diverse mix of traffic that was a sleepy branch line until just over 2 decades ago. Absent the Norfolk Southern merger, and the north end of the Newcastle district would probably be operated by a short line today or abandoned. Next, at 7 p.m., an eastbound Triple Crown road roller on the former Wabash Main Line with BNSF power hammers the diamond crossing of the Newcastle District and the former Wabash Main, known as the Huntington District, at Hugo on the west side of Fort Wayne. Hugo is 12 miles west of Ossian and just over 2 miles from the end of the Newcastle District tract at West Wayne, where it connects with the former Nickel Plate line to Chicago. Several trains use the connecting track on the right of the Newcastle sub-main line in order to take the Huntington District through Fort Wayne. Our last train on Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District is westbound local L68, arriving at Hugo at 8:36 in the evening and stopping just short of the grade crossing here. The dispatcher had told the crew to put their train in a small yard at Ferguson, 4 miles east of here, and proceed to Fort Wayne as a light engine move. However, the dispatcher also told L68 that we will have to wait for 3 trains to get by before he can get a signal for the connecting track to the Huntington District and proceed east through Fort Wayne to the yard on the east side of town. Since it likely will be dark before he gets a signal, we decided to get L68 on video while we can. L68 has the same power that was on the eastbound L69 local that we saw at Ponetta yesterday. The next train just after dark will be westbound number 196. I hope that you have enjoyed Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District.